Steve, great that you're with us here today. It's a privilege to take this opportunity to talk to you about the recent research report that you've just completed. So we've got a few questions for you, if you don't mind.
Not at all. Fire away, John.
Great. Okay, thank you. So first of all then, question number one. What is the focus of your report?
Well, first of all, it's focused on a particular area. It's focused on impact and effectiveness of remote online learning in the Middle East and North Africa region. So it's focused pretty specifically on that topic and in that place. There's a literature review which covers important themes related to COVID, remote and online learning, and some of the current evidence we have about maximizing professional development effectiveness. So there's 4 programs that we're looking at. In all 4, we're interested in primarily this shift to remote learning that we've had to all engage with as a response to the pandemic. And in a little bit more detail, there's the MENA-wide Community of Practice Leader Program, the Egyptian National Teacher Training Program, which is in its 2nd year, and then the Teaching for Success Syria and the Teaching for Success Palestine. So there's basically 4 cases looking at this effectiveness of remote PD.
Great. Okay, so the focus is on professional development delivered remotely for teachers. And you've been looking at case studies here in the Middle East and North Africa region, and you've looked at also at the existing literature around remote learning in general. And how did you actually carry out the research then? What kinds of things did you do to get the data and the insights?
Well, first of all, it was important to get primary data because a lot of research in this area is kind of an amalgamation of different survey reports that have been done in the past, which are usually based on questionnaire data. So we wanted to adopt a mixed method approach, which is basically just combining at least one element of a quantitative approach with elements of a qualitative research. And I'm primarily more interested in qualitative research because I think it gives you more detail of what actually is happening. So we tried to use the best of both, I guess, and have a survey which gives us some numbers and some percentages about how people feel about professional development online. But also we wanted to have focus groups and interviews to really dig down into people's experience and hear the voices of a range of teachers and teacher educators that have been trying to do the best they can in these difficult circumstances. And I suppose it's worth just saying that involves a number of steps. I was particularly interested in looking at recordings of online participation in synchronous Zoom sessions usually, but sometimes in Teams. Talking and interviewing program managers to get a good idea of the background and the history of the projects. Then we did the literature review, as we've said. Then focus groups and interviews, and those fed into a survey design, which we then distributed. And once I'd got all the data together, just looked at it and developed a thematic coding. I used a couple of pieces of software, which, if anyone's interested, you could email me. But, one of them is Otter AI, which is very good at generating transcripts and gives you some coding. And then obviously I've worked collaboratively with the British Council team in the 4 countries to try and generate a report which does justice to the details of what's been happening. It's been very exciting and a very enjoyable collaborative process.
Well, it's great that you've enjoyed it. So a mixed methodology then, qualitative and quantitative design. So that included reviewing project documents, talking to project managers and program managers, but also the focus group discussions and observation of sessions, as well as online surveys. And from all of that, then what kind of key insights did you pick up on?
Well, I suppose the overall one is that professional development can be effective for teachers, even if they're not used to this kind of way of working on their professional development. Of course, there are significant challenges that needed to be overcome, and they were experienced. So it's important to see that effectiveness in the context of some of those constraints. But I think what we've seen overall is that teacher educators and teachers have been resilient, collaborative, pretty patient and innovative really in what they've managed to achieve in these communities of practice and teacher activity groups. I think the qualitative data shows that being part of one of these groups has been an important site for sharing ideas, materials, resources, but also a really important source of emotional support in these challenging times. The survey data, I think, shows that teachers prefer face-to-face. If you were going to have a black and white choice between face-to-face and remote PD, they prefer face-to-face. But there's a significant minority, something like 25% who prefer it. And I think when you dig down a bit deeper, you find that people might actually prefer a more hybrid or mixed model. So I think another finding was that teachers have been able to work on developing their digital literacy, being able to try out tools and ideas online. So I think there's overall a greater understanding of digital pedagogy and what your options are in the classroom. And also we found other things like it's important in teacher activity groups to define roles and maybe share things round a bit, and that video can play a really important role with short clips as examples to bring the classroom into the remote environment. And another finding, I think, is that a regular structure is important. So participants know what to expect and you build up these patterns and routines over the week. So I think those are kind of some of the more interesting findings of the whole project, John.
Okay, there's a lot in there, of course, and perhaps just unpick a little bit a few of those things. But you know, for listeners, for our audience here today, of course, you can look in more detail at these key insights through Steve's report. I was interested what you were saying about being part of a group in the way that contributes to resilience in difficult times. I think that's a really, really important point, and something that we've been very conscious of in developing the teacher networking initiative. And I think also the attitudes towards remote learning amongst teachers. And it's very interesting what you were saying about preferences. I think that, you know, if I understood that correctly, that given the choice, then teachers would probably prefer face-to-face, but over time have become more confident, you're talking about digital literacy skills, in operating successfully within a remote learning environment. So, and I think that's something maybe we can come on to when we look at what the future might hold. What you were saying about blended learning and bringing together different spaces, different channels for learning that are both face-to-face and remote. So that was really good. And the points about structure and roles and responsibilities within these remote groups also really, really interesting. Maybe your overall conclusion then that you started with at the beginning, when you said that remote learning for teachers in terms of helping their professional development can be effective then. So what kinds of things do you think contribute to this effectiveness? When if you're a teacher and you are planning to do some remote learning, or if you are organizing some remote learning, what kinds of things do you think you would need to consider to make it effective?
Okay, well, I think that's a really interesting question. I think I'll probably divide that into two parts. If we talk about some overall conclusions first, and then I'll talk about some maybe more specific considerations. But as you say, really, the overall conclusion is that teachers can learn effectively through remote PD. They can enhance their understanding, providing there's adequate induction, clear explanation, and good ongoing support from a facilitator or a teacher educator, or somebody who's going to play that role of encouraging and making sure that it works as well as it can do. I think synchronous sessions are particularly valuable for fostering peer-to-peer interaction and dialogue. They can be, they're not always, and I think there's still a balance between using them to give a lecture or give a lot of content, and those sessions which are more reflective, there's more dialogue, there's more sharing. So I think the key for professional development is really the synchronous elements and getting those right, because that's what really motivates the teachers, I think, and improves outcomes. But I think the data in all four cases shows that teachers can work effectively and that they appreciate the value of working online. The levels of satisfaction are consistently high across the four cases. And of course, they're slightly different. You know, like in Syria, people have been working online for a good many years now, and they haven't had any choice. And to some extent in Palestine too, where travel can be difficult, then remote learning has been really important. So perhaps there hasn't been such a major pivot in those areas. But I think moving on to the second part, you asked about important considerations. If you're organising professional development, if that's part of your role, the first thing I'd say is to go back to something we've talked about, to provide a regular structure in the synchronous session, have a review, a warmer, an input, some dialogue, some demonstrations, a video, some tasks, and if you can, breakout discussions, because there's a lot of evidence now that, you know, like an hour online is a long time without some breakout sessions for variety, but also for peer-to-peer interaction. Give the teachers an opportunity to actually experience digital tools in the synchronous session, and then encourage them to try them out in their classrooms. There's been a lot of good practice in that area. I think, you know, embracing a flipped model is really important. Some tasks need to be done before the synchronous session. The really effective groups are where people are coming to the session and they've already thought about something. They've already read something or explored, tried something out in the classroom, or they've watched a video, and you're coming with something to say. So that flipped element, I think, is really important. We've talked about specific roles. I think that's really good. Maybe one person to create notes, another person to run a blog, another person to organize the Facebook page if you had one. But I think if everybody feels involved, then there's more chance that people won't feel that overburdened. And I think that's important. I've talked about integrating video. I think that is something that is important in any professional development, but particularly online, where variety and having a change of focus is really key. And along that line, some of the most exciting work we've seen is where people are integrating quizzes and polls, things like Kahoot and Mentimeter, WordWall, Nearpod, lots of different tools, which again change the focus, get people to look at a task and think about it and complete it, and then talk a little bit more. So I think that's been really important. One of the amazing things for me is to see how prevalent WhatsApp is. I mean, I kind of knew that WhatsApp from the literature is a big deal, as a plan B sometimes where things go wrong and people can't connect. So you use WhatsApp to at least be able to invite some comment and keep people kind of included in the group. But also all that stuff that happens outside the group, you know, to share links, and I saw this today and there's a webinar next Tuesday. All those kinds of things are really important. I'd finish with one thing is you know, one thing that we know is that we were rushed into this in many cases, and there wasn't always enough induction about how to use the tools, how to use Teams, for example, how to use Zoom. And I think that if you're planning work online, it's always good to think about the training needs first and maybe use screencast or find some YouTube. There's plenty of stuff out there to show people the basic functions of the tools that you're planning to use.
Great. Again, so much in there that needs further discussion and further looking at. You know, you talked a little bit about challenge. I think we just experienced some challenge of working remotely. We may have lost you there when you were talking about the first part of your answer. I think one of the points about the last point that you made in particular around induction, and I think one of the things that we've really realized in this, as you called it, rush to online delivery, is that it's often that lack of preparedness that's been particularly challenging, so that teachers and learners don't have necessarily the digital literacy skills, the knowledge of some of those platforms and tools that you were talking about, in order to access the content and navigate the content and learn from the content successfully. So I think that point in particular around being prepared, and induction, I think are really, really key to all of this. And part of being prepared, I think, and it's something that you alluded to earlier around blended learning. So this mixture of different kinds of channels that can be used for teachers to learn, but also for teachers to teach. I think that's really important. You talked about the flipped classroom. So bringing in asynchronous platforms, using synchronous platforms, using face-to-face in some kind of effective and well-considered combination, I think is really, really, really important points. And I was going to ask you on that subject. Do you think that it's it's that mixture of different models, different channels that you think will be a key element of our future working lives, that we're using different things for different purposes, but essentially, and this is a theme that we've returned to a lot through the Teacher Networking Initiative, that everything has changed, but that also nothing has changed, in that we're looking to support good teaching, effective pedagogy, engaging learners successfully in the classroom, that we will continue with those principles, but just using different ways of arriving at the same kind of outcome that we've always wanted. That was rather a long question, sorry.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I think you've raised, I think, the challenge, which is to use the technology that we have I suppose in really simple terms, a lot of us have had a crash course in what's available because we've needed to carry on with our teaching, with our professional development. So we now know a little bit more about which tools can help us to engage and motivate. And I think that we're unlikely to return to exactly the same normal that we had before. But even then, there was a lot of realization that training events happen and then there's not much follow-up afterwards, or that a training event happens and people are not, they come to the event and they're not really warmed up. So I think even if you were primarily going to do a face-to-face course, you might think about how you could use asynchronous and synchronous platforms before the training event to get people warmed up, to get people thinking about the topic, and maybe collect a little bit of data from their class, or maybe interview another teacher, or talk to a focus group of their students, just to find out how they're feeling about the learning. So I think that we've realized that for quite a long time, that we shouldn't see training as a one-off face-to-face event. But I think you've picked out some of the areas that I think are really key. Is we know that there are a lot of teachers that are not here today with us in the room, and they weren't the ones that I talked to for the research, because really the only people that we get to talk to are those people who are connected and who are reasonably digitally literate. But of course, there's a lot more that aren't, and we need to target some of those teachers, raise their confidence, and give them more of those basic digital skills, so that they don't feel left behind, that they feel more comfortable. So I think that's a big challenge for us, but one that we need to take on. And then we've got the more specific things like induction for groups that we've talked about, this big issue of how can we best achieve what we want to in a hybrid and flip way. And going back to the point right at the beginning, I think we will have maybe predominantly face-to-face sometimes if we can, but there'll still be elements of hybrid and flip which will help us do better in that environment. And there will still be plenty of remote PD for geographical and economic reasons. It may be the best option for particular projects. So it's unlikely that remote learning will disappear after COVID.
Brilliant. Okay, so thank you so much indeed, Steve. Great talking to you this morning. And we hope you're going to stay with us for the rest of the sessions today. And of course, standard reading, Steve Maan's report on understanding the effectiveness of remotely delivered professional development for teachers. Thank you very much, Steve. We'll see you later.
Thanks a lot, John.